digital migration is transforming the entertainment and media sector into one of collaborative partnerships. But this trend also puts revenues under pressure. And here to take the discussion further is Vicki Myburgh, entertainment and media leader at PwC. Thanks so much, Vicki, for joining us this afternoon. Well, let's at the top unpack the size and scope of South Africa's entertainment and media sector, because 2010 saw total spend in the industry rise 21%, and it seems impressive enough if you're just looking at those headline figures, because it's taken it to 98 billion rand.
Yeah, that is a good comment, although bearing in mind 2010 was an exceptional year for South Africa with the World Cup. So a large portion of that increase is the World Cup.
Yeah.
In 2011, that's going to reverse. So we will see growth, but in advertising, for example, it will be down to be 4%, and then back up to the high single-digit sort of numbers.
So the potential for growth in this industry is extreme.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
It's exactly, that growth that's exciting the industry, and a trend that's hoping to facilitate the growth is this trend towards digital migration. First of all, what exactly are we looking at when we're talking digital migration?
That is an interesting point, and I think more and more we're seeing consumers moving away from the traditional and moving to digital medium. So it's using their mobile phones, it's social networking, it's all of that, and it's developing the content for all of those mediums. So that's why it is an exciting time for the entertainment and media industry. While there's a lot of uncertainty around the world, it is a changing place.
It's an exciting time, but what kind of uptake have we seen in South Africa relative to our global peers? Because we're looking at internet-enabled services, we're looking at smartphones, mobile devices, as you say, web-enabled TV. It's next-generation infrastructure, and with that, accessibility and affordability become two key issues that we need to consider within the South African context in particular.
Absolutely, and I think looking at the stats, if you look at the mature countries, they're reaching 90% penetration of broadband by 2015. We're still just at 30% at that point. If you look at mobile devices, we're also well off the pace. And I think, as you said, it is quite unaffordable for a large portion of the population. Although it's changing. I think Vodacom have announced the $100 smartphone. So in a year's time, I think a lot of these devices will be a lot cheaper and more accessible.
And of course, what an underpenetrated market does is provide the opportunity for growth.
Absolutely.
Are companies sitting up and taking notice and actually looking hard enough for ways to leverage off this digital value chain, so to speak?
I think they are, and I think they're being forced to, because consumers are now demanding that. They're demanding a different way of doing business, a different way of engaging with them. And if they don't find it, they move elsewhere. So companies are, less so in South Africa, but it's coming.
What kind of shift are we seeing in business models? Because, to reap the full benefit of innovation like this, traditional business models, one would assume, would need to be scrapped, maybe not entirely, but to quite a large extent.
Your traditional business model with digital a little bit somewhere on the side won't work anymore. Companies have to think digital. They've got to think about putting their products across all the different platforms. A newspaper just in print won't be enough. You've got to get it out across on mobile, through the various social networks.
So it's about diversifying your service offerings.
Exactly.
Okay, looking at these broader revenue models as more and more companies take hold and of this phenomenon and jump on the bandwagon, with consumers being bombarded, to what extent do we risk a crowding out effect taking place?
There is that risk. Although I think a lot of the things disappear as quickly as they come, and consumers are saying what they like quite quickly. Where in the past it was more what the company wanted, they pushed out. Now consumers are pulling what they want and the rest, and companies are becoming experimental, much more than they ever were.
One would assume a lot more competitive as well. How are you assessing that competitive landscape?
It is becoming competitive, and it's becoming difficult for companies if they don't embrace this. A good example, and I think one of the themes of the outlook, is collaboration. A company that thinks they can do everything these days won't succeed, because things are moving so quickly that they can't be everything in their own chain. They need to work with companies that before were their competitors, Now they need to work together to actually engage with customers.
We talk about a working together and a collaboration, but what impact do you see this trend having on the traditional media, and what role do you see traditional media having to play, or do we stand at that kind of media becoming redundant at some point?
I don't think so. Not in South Africa, but 2015 certainly not. I mean, if we look at newspapers, television has never been in a better place. And I think a few years ago we were all saying television was going to be cannibalized by the internet. It's actually looking stronger than ever, and probably will continue to, because people always like watching live sport events. It's becoming a community, sharing with each other. Newspapers, again, in South Africa are not going to disappear in the near future. They're still very strong. So I think we are certainly a few years behind some of the mature economies, but the traditional mediums still remain quite strong.
It does mean that revenue comes under pressure, though, because you're seeing a moving away from higher price physical distribution to lower price digital distribution. And the pressure's certainly on. Do we get to a point where the sector will ultimately have to convince consumers to start paying for the services?
And that's exactly the challenge, because I think up to now, many of these services are completely for free. And consumers are getting quite used to not having to pay, and now to have to pay, you've got to convince them that what they're getting is much better than a free alternative. And I think they can be convinced, but the correct model they're still searching for.
Well, certainly it's something they're going to have to, put their thinking hats on in terms of getting right, because, where you've got a situation where content cannot be monetized, surely an unsustainable business model for those involved.
Somebody's going to have to pay.
At the end of the day. Well, Vicki, thanks so much for your time. Vicki Myburgh is, of course, entertainment and media leader at PwC.